Hello and welcome to Man Buns and Jesus. This is yet another episode in season 4. Don't ask me which one. They all run together at some point. I'm Pastor Ben Olschlager here in beautiful Lake Orion, Michigan, where it is currently incredibly muggy and hot. With me again, as always, is Pastor Josh Laborious, who is experiencing a little bit of the taste of home as tropical storms roll through California. Uh,
We got like less than a full day of rain and almost no wind. So
that's fair, but I'm sure it was still at least like, oh yeah, I remember this
the
from my childhood
mugginess the
in
next
Georgia.
morning, I was like, oh, the air's hugging me again. Good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Are
Anyway,
you
what?
go ahead?
Okay.
I already
If you
wrote
can't
down the
tell,
title for this episode. It's going to be Simple Ones. So
okay. Well, the reason that Josh is saying that, um, for our text today, we're going to look at the end of chapter 1, which means I think we've now touched on everything in chapter 1. I
yeah,
don't know if
that
we did the
sounds about
beginning.
right. Of Proverbs. We're in the book of Proverbs for
Yeah.
yeah.
Um. So from verse 20 on, wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the markets, she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy streets, she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates, she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? If you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you, because I have called and you refused to listen. I've stretched out my hand, and no one has heeded. Because you have ignored my counsel and would have none of my reproof, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. When terror strikes you like a storm, and your calamity comes like a whirlwind. When distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, would have none of my counsel, and despised all my reproof. Therefore they shall eat of the fruit of the way, and have their fill of their own devices. The simple are killed by their turning away. The complacency of fools destroys them. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of disaster. Josh,
Ben,
what are we talking about today?
we're going to be diving into an episode, ladies and gentlemen, that we probably should have started this season with, because fundamentally what these verses are getting at, and they it talks about them a couple different ways, is kind of the rationale for wisdom, and the kind of the call, or maybe even call it a challenge, to be wise, to connect with people in such a way that your wisdom grows. um, and a couple things that I'm gonna put out, and then Ben, I'd love, like, you can, dealer's choice. You can pick which one of these you want to talk about first. But
Okay.
one of the things, if you look at these first two verses, wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the markets she raises her voice. At the head of noisy streets she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates she speaks. Um, all of those places where it's illustrating wisdom being and wisdom speaking are places that are full of noise and full of distractions. And I think that is just as true today, if not more true today than it has ever been, where the wise voice frequently gets drowned out. And you have to be pretty intentional. That's the word I was looking for. You have to be intentional about looking for, listening for, and heeding wisdom as opposed to everything else. So that's one thing that pulls out. Um, and then later it talks about uh, with speaking from the perspective of wisdom personified, then they will call upon me, I won't answer. They'll seek me diligently, but they won't find me because they hated knowledge and they didn't choose the fear of the Lord. They wouldn't have any of my counsel and they despised all my reproof. And I think one of the reasons that we have this, so that first thing kind of speaks to um, kind of a passive resistance to wisdom, in that it's not that you're rejecting it, it's just that you're not going out of your way to seek it. But then these verses speak more to someone who is actively rejecting or avoiding wisdom. And we can dive into what that looks like and why that might be. But I do think a large kind of a catch-all for why would we as people reject wisdom, reject knowledge, and it's because a lot of times wisdom and knowledge come with an implication or an obligation to action.
Hmm.
And action frequently requires, I mean, not to be redundant, but it requires action on our part, or it requires change on our part, and we don't necessarily love those things. And then finally, there's
You
some.
said you had two. This
I
is
said I
three.
had three.
You
Well, if I said two earlier, and I would say we'll listen back to prove me right or wrong, but I won't. Um, I meant three. And the third
yeah.
is just this: the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. And kind of how do we deal with complacency? How do we I actually just got an email from an organization today. I don't know if you're on their mailing list, Ben. I don't know how I got on it. Half their emails go to spam at this point because I just delete them. But they talked about the danger of apathy and how apathy is kind of always growing, and apathy and complacency are two very closely related things. So it's interesting that I got that email today. I don't buy into most of what the email was saying, but anyway. So where do you want to head first, Ben?
Hmm. I think I want
Also,
to dive
side
back
note, we
in.
both have colored shirts on today. That's a new one. We haven't
Yeah.
both had collared shirts on for a while.
Yeah. I could just not wear a shirt if that makes this better.
It very much does not.
Okay.
Please do not do that.
Um, so I would circle back to your second question and even get back to the question rather than getting to your answer. Like, why do people avoid wisdom? I think you answered well with like, wisdom often comes with an implication to action, which means there's going to be change, which means, there's often going to be discomfort. Um, but I don't think we even need to get that far into things for things to be questionable there. And I think it also depends on the kind of wisdom that you're talking about. So in my head, I'm splitting wisdom into two camps here. One, worldly wisdom, just knowing how the world works. Two, godly wisdom, knowing how God works. Um, and I
Which,
think
to be fair, there's a lot of overlap there.
yeah,
Yeah,
certainly.
for
Like
obvious reasons.
the wisdom that we gain about creation and about how God works in and through his creation oftentimes contains elements of both. But things like, I don't know, how to efficiently use swipe text on your phone, that's purely worldly wisdom.
Step one: have an Android.
Yes. Yep. Has been there for years. Apple got it recently, I think.
Oh, they did.
Yep.
Good for them.
No Apple user that I know actually uses it though, because they're also ingrained in their
Click,
tip
click,
tapping.
click, click, click.
Yeah,
It's so much better.
agreed. Anyway, um, I'm citing that as an example of like there's little to no godly wisdom at all in the
In how you type on your phone.
exactly. Generally, I think, and you could subdivide worldly wisdom even further, but I think generally people like gaining worldly wisdom if it makes their life easier. So, like, finding out a new shortcut. Okay, this is a particular frustration of mine, and this is a sidebar, but I'm going to rant against Microsoft here for a second. Microsoft has a couple of handy shortcuts that allow you to paste um, above and beyond just pasting copy and paste straight up, right? Specifically, pasting with unformatted text. Love that ability. As somebody who is frequently copying scripture passages from Logos or Bible Gateway into slides for Sunday worship, it annoys the living daylights out of me that Microsoft did not give that ability to PowerPoint. You cannot shortcut paste unformatted text into PowerPoint.
Huh. I
Yeah,
didn't know that. I have not used PowerPoint in a very long time.
it's annoying. It's incredibly annoying.
That's a
Um,
very niche thing to be irritated about.
it is a very niche thing for me to be irritated about. But the fact that I know that a shortcut exists in some of their products and not on the one where it would save me a lot of time is very annoying. And I cite that as an example of um, wisdom that I gained about something worldly that made my life easier that I've held on to and has been like
Can I
easy for me to
drop
hold
a
on to.
major piece of related wisdom that I only recently found out about? And I consider myself fairly tech savvy
Sure.
because everyone I've shared this with, they didn't know it was a thing. And it's okay. So, with your clipboard, when you're copying and pasting things on the computer, if you have a Windows machine, you can go back into your history and paste things from previously. Instead of Control V, which is usually paste, you use Windows key V, and it'll bring up a little box of everything you have, and you can copy whatever you need, including you can pin things that you need to copy regularly. So, like, I have a template for devotional videos for the description for devotional videos. So I have that pin. So I don't have to go find it to copy it new every time. I just Windows V. The trick is for our Windows users out there, you have to turn it on first. So click Windows V and it'll say, do you want to turn this feature on? Turn it on. It's a game changer, ladies and gentlemen. And Ben's smug look says he knew about it. We worked in IT together for 2 years and you never told me, so you suck.
I'm sorry. It, like most every possible shortcut that you can use to make life easier uh, in engineering, I figured out specifically in Excel. Um, God bless Microsoft Excel. Um, but all of that to say, like, Josh has learned something this week or relatively recently. I don't know if that was this week, I
Yeah,
guess.
it was a few months ago. I've been using
Okay.
it for a while.
Okay. So Josh learned something relatively recently that made his life easier. That was worldly wisdom. He wasn't necessarily intentionally seeking it out,
Oh no,
But
I very much was. I
oh,
was
were
like,
you
there's
now?
got to be a way for me to have these all just sitting around.
Okay.
So the internet told me.
Okay.
But when you talk about worldly wisdom, and I'm not sure how solid this is. So let's. But my what I have noticed a few times, and I've noticed it enough that I wonder if it's well, and theologically, I can say this is probably a rule. I think worldly wisdom is constantly playing catch up with godly wisdom. And while it matters very little in stuff like we're talking about, one example I'll use to illustrate what I mean is somewhere along the line there was worldly wisdom that said it may, or we won't call it worldly wisdom. We'll say there was intuition that said if a couple lives together before they're married, they can kind of test run what it'll look like, and that will strengthen their eventual marriage. And godly wisdom would say, no, you don't live together with someone before you're married. And worldly wisdom is now catching up to godly wisdom because the statistics are bearing out that marriages between people who did not live together before they're married, statistically, they tend to last longer. They tend to be more secure. Um, so, and I think another way you could describe worldly wisdom and why people are more comfortable with it is because it's something we can kind of put our hands on and say, like, we can prove this or we can show this. Whereas godly wisdom sometimes comes with very little justification, and you're kind of just trusting God said it, so it is wisdom. Um, but I think a lot of things, like over the years, as we study humanity more and as we study kind of the social sciences more, a lot of godly wisdom plays out in the real world. And for people who like Ben and myself who are in theology, we'll see some of this stuff and we're like this new thing psychology has found, and we're like, well, no, duh, because the Bible told us that hundreds of years ago, right? Like we've known this, we've figured this out already, and worldly wisdom is catching up. But I wonder if that's part of it, because worldly wisdom, we can kind of say, oh, I understand why this is. Whereas godly wisdom, sometimes you have to just take on faith.
Yeah. And I guess it depends on how you would describe taking on faith, because like the things that I would describe as godly wisdom are the things that he has revealed to us. And oftentimes there's a way that he's revealed those things to us that provides support for it. Um, so we don't necessarily have to take just at face value that God is loving because he sent Jesus to die for us. Like that's a pretty blatant example of that to me. Um, and like you could kind of extrapolate that along a lot of different lines. Like we know God's faithful because he cared for his people Israel for, I wish I could remember the number of generations from uh, Joshua to Jesus, but brain. Um, a lot, a lot of generations when there was no good reason to call them his people other than they were the ones he picked, right? So God has displayed a lot of these things that we pick up about him, the way that he operates, the wisdom that he or the wisdom that we can gain about him and the way that he will consistently work in our lives. And we don't necessarily have to take that on faith. Um,
Okay, so I think I was misunderstanding where we were drawing the line between godly and worldly wisdom, I think,
sure.
because it sounds like you're saying you're understanding godly wisdom as very well, I shouldn't say more narrowly than I was thinking about it, because all those are examples of wisdom about God. So God is faithful, God is loving, whatever. When I hear godly wisdom, where I was kind of expanding it to is the way God tells us to live as his people. So that includes what we believe about God and what we know about God, but that also includes the things that he tells us about our lives that are wise ways to comport ourselves in relationships with each other, which by the definition you're using, I think we would say that's worldly wisdom. But some of that, a worldly place is not going to get you there. As far as like wisdom and the wisdom of living ethically, if that makes sense.
I think I'm tracking with you. You can feel free to correct me if you think I'm being dumb here. But
Well, simple ones love being simple. Continue.
yeah, sure. So to me, the outpouring of Christian life that comes from our leaning into the things that God has taught us um, is also kind of exampled or um, given to us in such a way that we can have some level of proof. Proof's not the right word I was quite looking for, but um, we can run through the Ten Commandments and just kind of like, so have no other gods before me. Well, no other god has proved to be quite so faithful, so why bother? Um, do not take the name the name of the Lord your God in vain. People of Israel do that all the time. Um, it tends to not go well for them. Um, I specifically think of the example where Eli's sons bring the ark into battle, and it gets taken because they think that just by like
They think they're going to force God's hand by having it there.
exactly. Um, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. It's proven that humans need a cycle of rest, and without it, we're far less capable. Honor your father and mother. Societies that have a good sense of order and structure tend to be more prosperous and happier. Um, do not kill or do not murder. Um, Murder's bad. Don't do it. Um, do not commit adultery. Again, plenty of evidence suggesting that faithful relationships are far stronger. Um,
And better for, yeah.
yeah, and like we could just keep going down the list, right?
Well, and
So
so is that an intersection of godly and worldly wisdom, or because I mean you
I
can,
guess so to back up just a half step and maybe give you a bit better idea where my head's going. To me, godly wisdom is things that have been revealed to us by God,
yes,
and it speaks to how He works. Um, hang on one sec.
hanging on. So, well, and I don't Ben, I don't know if he's probably still half listening, but um all of this is to say, regardless of what the wisdom is about, there are different degrees of how much it affects our lives. And I think because we're getting back to like why would someone actively hate knowledge or wisdom?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it boils down to how like what is the immediate felt impact of it? Because a lot of this wisdom that we're talking about, it it's going to limit. It's going to say, well, maybe you shouldn't do that thing, even if you want to do that thing, because it's
Mm-hmm.
not real. Like long term, it's not going to play out for you
Mm-hmm.
from a worldly perspective or from a godly perspective, because He told you not to, and it is wise to obey God the Father Almighty. Um, Whereas wisdom, where it's like it doesn't really, like, you don't feel a burden of its impact, and maybe it even short term benefits you. Like, so maybe, or how long are people gonna like love being simple, hate knowledge? Maybe it comes down to uh, short term impact, and people don't like wisdom because sometimes, and a lot of times, the short term impact is uncomfortable. Is that fair?
I think
And
there's
sure, there are
definitely a
other
fairness.
reasons to hate wisdom. I just,
I, yeah, no, that's definitely a fair reason to hate wisdom.
well,
Like
it's
the
it's a
discomfort
fair
piece is
description
definitely
of a
there.
reason people use. It's, if
Yeah,
that's your reason, stop it. That's,
yeah.
get wise, son.
Um, I think to me, one of the biggest reasons that people um would reject wisdom largely has to do with worldview and like something necessitating a reframing of your worldview. Because like I don't think it's that difficult for somebody to make a lifestyle change that doesn't impact their worldview on a significant level, right? Um, if I don't know, if somebody came up to you with good evidence that said, "Hey, you specifically," and I'm speaking to you, the audience here, put yourself in this set of shoes. Hopefully, this kind of fits your context. You specifically need to stop drinking coffee, or you are going to have liver failure or something. I don't know. I know we got pretty severe, but like if that fits within your worldview of it's good for me to take care of my body, then it's pretty easy for you to change. If your framework includes like uh, I'm going to do what I want and you can't stop me and I like coffee, then that is a much more difficult thing for you to change. And I think like you can put that through the framework of uh, you know what are the overlying like ideologies that guide you principally in life. Um, and if
Well, and it can even be lower stakes than that, because when you were introducing this, an example that came to mind for me is Lionel Messi.
okay,
Okay, so for anyone who's unaware, Lionel Messi, by a lot of people, is considered the greatest soccer player in the world. There are people who argue back and forth on that, but I mean, he's definitely up there. No one, I've never met anyone who seriously says that he's not phenomenal at the sport. Okay.
yeah, I think at this point, certainly arguably the best player in the history of the sport. Um, as he's reaching a certain age, maybe not the best in the world anymore, but definitely still up there.
So this man has recently transferred to the MLS. That's Major League Soccer. That's the American soccer, well, American and Canadian Soccer League. Um, and I really, because Ben and I don't know if you're actually in this camp or not, Ben, but we had a bunch of friends at the seminary who were like big European soccer fans, and they're always ragging on the MLS. Oh, the MLS is it's an inferior league. The MLS is not really good. It's not quality compared
Mhm.
to the Premier League, compared to these European soccer leagues. So there was part of, because I'm a homer, right? I love the MLS. The MLS is what I watch. Atlanta United is one of my favorite soccer. I mean, the jersey behind me, if you're watching the video, is an Atlanta United jersey for a player who doesn't play for us anymore. Um, but I love the MLS, and I thought to myself, how great would it be if the greatest soccer player ever came to the, because he's still like, he didn't leave European soccer because he couldn't cut it anymore. right? There were still multiple teams willing to sell the farm for Lionel Messi. He came to the MLS. I mean, there are probably a lot of reasons. One is so much money, so much money. He gets a cut of all the Apple streaming money that go like wholesale. The MLS gets their cut, and then Lionel Messi as an individual gets a cut of Apple TV subscriptions with the MLS Plus. Okay. And also, they promised him when he's done playing, he can have his own team and he can be an owner of a team in the MLS. So he came over, and I thought, how great would it be? Like, how much of a shut up, sit down would it be if he came to the MLS and struggled? And I wanted that so badly to be the case so I could make the argument the MLS, I'm not going to say it's the best league in the world, but it's a lot better than people think it is. That has not been the case. Lionel Messi has done extremely well. I haven't been following because it grinds my gears, but I do not know that Inter Miami has lost since he has joined their team. In his first several games, he scored several times, and I'm struggling with accepting the wisdom that Lionel Messi is so great and that the MLS is an inferior soccer league, because I don't want it to be. Okay, so this kind of, is it changing your worldview? My worldview is raw. My league's the best. Let's go. And it is the evidence is suggesting otherwise. Anyway, we could jump in a rabbit hole here, but we're not going to. But there's another example of, like, wisdom would say the MLS is not as good. I didn't want that to be true. And now it's becoming harder and harder for me to hold on to. We're not that far behind, because it looks like we're pretty darn far behind. Although signing Messi is a huge step in the right direction, because we got a real player while he was still good.
Yeah.
Who chose to come to the MLS.
This is not the first time that the MLS has done that, but like,
well, most of the time they've been washed up.
It's the highest profile name at the most, like, still relatively skilled point in his career.
Ibrahimovic went to LA a few years back, but he was terrible.
He was not bad. He went back to Italy and was still playing well there too.
Well, he did not do well in the MLS. I don't even know if he was the highest producing player on his team that year.
That was more ego driven than it was skill.
Yeah.
But that's also Zlatan. So
lions do not compare themselves to sheep.
Sure.
He said that in an interview because he listed a bunch of the best soccer players in the world, and they were like, "You didn't list yourself," and he's like, "I'm not going to compare myself to them."
Yeah.
This isn't a
Beckham, I will definitely grant you, though, when David Beckham came to LA Galaxy, he was pretty washed. He was still really, really good, and especially compared to where the MLS was at that point, like, he made some people look very silly, and question their career choices.
They're getting better.
Yes.
Not that good, but they're getting better.
All of that is to say, Josh, I think you're spot on with that observation. Like, there are all sorts of things that could block us from wanting to accept wisdom, and it plays into, how we've constructed our idea of the world. As Josh said, he's a homer. He wants the things that are in front of him to be the best available in the world. And that means if he can go to an MLS game, he wants that to be the best league in the world, because that means he's getting the best bang for his buck, right? He's seeing the best product available. And unfortunately, it's just not true.
Yeah, I'm
in that particular case,
league instead of the pros.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe not literally. Let's say minor league. I'm choosing.
Yeah, it's minor league. Like, there are players in MLS that go to other leagues and succeed. But I'm digressing so hard.
Now we
Um,
can let's continue talking about wisdom.
yeah. So the other two things that you brought up, um, one was complacency. Like, why do we just stop seeking wisdom? I think that one is more of a like change oriented thing.
I'm happy where I am. I don't want to run into something that's going to make me move.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I'm happy where I'm at. I don't think there's anything that I could do that would make a huge change in my life. Yada 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 yada. Why seek out more wisdom if I don't think it's really going to bring me a big material benefit? Um, well, that's a terrible reason to stop seeking wisdom because there are always things that we can be doing to improve. Um, in Bible study last night with my midweek Bible study, we were talking discipleship and um, kind of mentioned how a lot of church bodies struggle with once you hit the big um, like life defining checkpoints in Christian education or in the process of becoming a full member of the church or whatever the case may be, it is very difficult for churches to continue encouraging growth when the reality is a 5-year-old walking into Sunday school for the first time versus an 87-year-old lifelong member of a church. They are still called to grow.
And they still have the same amount of room to grow.
Yeah,
Which you
because we have
say,
an
well, that doesn't make sense because someone who's been in the church for 50 years, they should be further along. But when you're talking about the scope of infinity,
yeah,
having 5 years and having 50 years, you still have infinity to go until you get to the end.
yeah,
It doesn't exist because it's infinity. So
yeah,
no matter where you are, no matter how you've progressed, there's always the same amount of space to continue to grow.
yeah.
So as what is it? I think it's Lowe's says, never stop improving. That's their slogan, I think.
I think you're right. Yeah. I was running through
Because I
home
don't.
improvement store slogans in my head. Um, because it's what Ace is the place with the helpful hardware folks.
It is Lowe's.
Home
Yeah, Lowe's
Depot.
is never stop improving.
Okay, good. They're all they're all really catchy.
I don't
Um,
remember what Home Depot's is.
you can do it. We can help.
Or doers get more done. That's Home Depot. I think
Isn't
they
it?
shifted it recently.
Okay.
Yeah. Chris said it from the background with much authority in her voice.
Okay.
So so yeah,
Still
don't
better
get
than save big
complacent.
money at Menards.
Huh? Oh
Still
yeah,
better
I
than
was gonna
save big
say
money at Menards.
I remember buying lumber there for our seminary project, and I did not feel like we were saving money. That lumber was expensive.
Lumber was that was also what
Yes, that was in the
April of
supply chain.
April of 21.
Yeah,
Yeah, March of 20, somewhere in there.
they
The
use
most
that fire
expensive
pit for
point to
stuff
buy lumber.
regularly, so that's cool. Um, anyway, if you're at the seminary and you're listening to this, we built the fire pit that's down by the tennis courts. That was us. Ben designed it with his civil engineering ways. We
Don't
built
give
it.
me all the credit. Joe Pearson and his industrial knowledge of the world came in quite handy too.
Oh yeah, everyone who was because he and Quincy helped put a lot of it together as
Yeah,
well. In any case, so
and
I don't know how much more we have to say about complacency. Honestly, um, we can be complacent about our approach to complacency, but I think it is worth speaking. Like there are always going to be other voices
Mhm.
especially when it comes to godly wisdom.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, even with worldly wisdom, like there's so many voices out there screaming for attention, and very few of them are wise. The wisest voice is almost never the loudest voice. And just an example for that, look at all of the quote unquote wisdom on healthy eating. There's so many people out there. This is how you eat. Cut out carbs. Do this. Do that. Like there are a million. You scroll through. There's always someone pushing some sort of diet, keto, vegan. All it's like, and if you talk to people like dietitians who really actually know what they're talking about, who've studied it, who have looked at it, they're like, eat a balanced diet, have a little bit of most things, don't have too much of anything. Like it's pretty simple, right? And but that's never the loudest voice isn't just kind of eat a variety of things, make sure you get your fruits and veggies in, and like nothing too not too much of anything. But that's not the voice that you see all over the place. That's not the headline you see. Um, and that's just like I don't know if it's the people I hang out with, but I see a lot of that of the nutrition wisdom. And it's like and that's just an example for any given thing. There's the wise voice, and then there's everybody else, and everybody else is a lot louder. You look like you have something judgmental you want to say.
No, I think you're spot on there. Like there was I had a friend in college who
Shocker.
was very loud. Um, and when we would get into arguments, which would occasionally happen because he was pretty passionate about a lot of things, he would get loud and just keep getting progressively louder. And it got to the point where
That's annoying.
we would yell at him, I'm louder, therefore I'm correct, to remind him, hey, shouting louder doesn't make you win, just makes you annoying. Sometimes he would shout that at us because we'd do the same thing back because things were escalating and we didn't recognize it either. So, like, there's a ton of truth in that where we just don't necessarily recognize we're listening to a loud voice, not necessarily a correct one. And that's leading us into a place of not wisdom, but foolishness or smooth brainedness is,
Yes.
yeah,
I am but
Josh
a
might like
smooth
to say.
I am but a smooth brained ape.
Yeah,
Invest in GameStop.
yeah.
Hold to the moon. I'm still so mad that I didn't invest in GameStop before that happened. Because I do, well, I don't like GameStop actually. They are the king of ripping off gamers. But anyway,
There's a lot of nostalgia there.
there
Um,
is. Bringing all your pre owned games to get like 30 cents for each one of them. Uh, I would say the good old days, but they were not. Um,
I think it's also kind of worth noting though that like in with the you have to filter out the loud stuff. You also just have to test almost everything and anything. And to me, the biggest test is biblical. Does this fit in with a good Christian ethic?
yeah.
Um, and like there might be things you hear in the wisdom of the world that fit in with a Christian ethic that also still don't pass the sniff test because they're just not true.
Yeah. And what's fascinating is I shouldn't say fascinating. It's incredibly frustrating for me is how belligerently people will defend wisdom. And if you really drill down, where did you learn this? Oh, I read half an article from Facebook. and you're getting like belligerent defending that quote unquote wisdom. Come now. Come on now. I think the sniff test, I think that's a great way to phrase it. It's just some people's noses are broken.
I mean, yeah, that's fair. To me, the sniff test is if you read something, especially like if it's a thing that's starting to um or desires to change the way that you see the world or something significant happening within it, like one article should not suffice. Even one book should not suffice. Um, get a breadth of information, really do your homework, um, and then acknowledge I am not an expert on Eastern European uh, socio-political whatever,
Issues. Yeah.
right? Like,
Well, and I don't know if you were in this class with me at the seminary, but it was Shuckard who at one point said, if you say one thing and everyone else who's ever really talked about the subject says another thing, you are probably not the one who is right. And he was talking about biblical interpretation. He says if you look at a verse and you read it in a different way than anyone has ever read it before, you are the idiot, not everybody else. But I think that's the same. Like if you find one article that says something and every other article about the topic says something else, you probably didn't find the diamond in the rough, the one article who was written by a savant genius. That's probably not it, but
yeah, yeah.
you look like you have something profound to say.
I really don't though.
We are the
I,
simple ones.
I think I'm just,
Trying not to go down rabbit holes with this stuff or
I mean,
rants.
yeah, we could always, like, we could cite an example. I could use the example that you brought up earlier. In our group of friends that knew anything about competitive soccer in the world, um, you were the only one that I think would hold the MLS to the kind of standard that you held them to prior to MLS or to Messi coming to MLS. Um, the rest
I'm
of us would all
definitely
go,
because I would. I mean, I'm wrong. I just don't want to be wrong.
that's fair. That's fair. And I can see where you're coming from, but it doesn't mean that you're right.
Yeah. Now, what I will contend is that for someone who doesn't really know what they're talking about, the difference for the viewer is minimal. In that, I don't watch like when I watch Premier League soccer, I'm not like, oh my goodness, they're so much better. They
Mm-hmm.
might be. I can't tell the difference. So I'm going to watch my soccer matches not at 2 in the morning. That's where I'm going to finish that conversation.
That's fair. And you're right. There can always be things that make it difficult to discern, levels and things. It's hard to tell that a game is moving 5% faster in soccer. It's hard to tell when one statement out of an article is false. It's hard to tell when one claim out of 100 is false. And it like those are the things that can sour the wisdom, right? Um, and so I think I'm ready for takeaways if you are.
Yeah, go for it.
And I'm gonna give my takeaway right off the bat here and say ones who don't desire wisdom or listen to false wisdom, like those are categorically different to me. If you straight up don't desire wisdom, like that's a mindset thing that you really should work on and try to change, because God always wants you to grow. If you have a hard time discerning between bad wisdom and good, I have a lot more sympathy for you, because, like Josh said, there are so many more distractions. Um, and this is where I think Timothy's advice uh, is good. Like, find the people in your church that are the wisest, lean into their wisdom, lean into the things that they are drawing on. If you are in a position of leadership in your congregation and you are someone that people come to because you think, or because they think you're wise, um, be discerning with how you give out that wisdom, but also like apply it. People are coming to you for that reason. Um, and in all things, approach that with humility, because none of us are God. And so as we're sifting through all of this, we have to be willing to acknowledge, hey, sometimes my wisdom is bad too.
How we do? Um, I think it. I'll be honest. A takeaway is kind of hard for me to like distill to say if it's one thing I want you to take away, choose this. Because like I'm tempted to say just pursue wisdom, and that seems maybe overly simplistic. Um, but maybe the takeaway I would put in front of people um, is to follow up on Ben's, and it's to say, like, this is one of the reasons that church is so important, is to surround yourself with people who are going to speak truth to you, who are going to speak wisdom to you. Because the problem when you surround yourself with people who don't challenge you, with people who don't speak the truth or the wisdom, is they're going to reinforce the foolishness. And when it gets reinforced enough, you're going to stop being able to even hear the wisdom because you've been reinforced as a fool so much. So surround yourself with faithful Christians who are going to speak truth, wisdom to you, even when that challenges you. That's going to be my takeaway for you. And with that, kind of wrapping up the show.
Passive
Like,
aggressive part. Send
oh,
this to your friends who might be stuck in a rut,
oh yeah,
feel like are
who might
rejecting
send
advice
this
and
to your
wisdom.
simple friends.
Yeah, I was trying to say it nicer so
Oh
that the
no, this
people who,
we're supposed to be passive aggressive here. There's nothing nice about that.
that's all supposed to be subtext, Josh.
Well, subtext is stupid. Just say what you mean.
Anyway, so
If
send it to
someone
your
sent
smooth
this to
brain
you, they might
friends.
be calling you simple. But you can improve on that. You can do better. Seek wisdom.
There you go. Um, and if you listen to this podcast regularly, subscribe, just helps us kind of know what's out there. If you need to get a hold of us, please do. Our
Yeah.
Facebook page is an option for those of you who don't know us personally. With that, brothers and sisters, go in peace. Serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.